Hi scientists, Mr. Peluso here. This video lesson is going to be on Mendelian genetics. So looking at the passing down of genetic traits, genetic inheritance, and who Gregor Mendel actually was. So the first thing we'll get into is genetic inheritance. So inheritance means passing down of characteristics from parents to offspring. So in order to explain this, I'm going to use the petal colors of flowers, okay? So when flowers pass down their genetic material, their offspring may or may not inherit their petal color. So first of all, I want to focus on different versions of genes. So when you have homologous chromosomes, which remember are matching sets of chromosomes where one is passed down from mum and one is passed down from dad. Okay. Now within those homologous chromosomes, you're going to have sections of DNA which are called genes. Now remember, genes can be thousands of bases long, more or less, alright? But each of those sections of DNA will code for a genetic trait, okay? And there's thousands and thousands of genes that exist on chromosomes and in general. So here we've kind of highlighted the gene for petal color of flowers. So somewhere on this chromosome, there is a section of DNA that says this flower is going to be this color, okay? And this section is right here. There's a copy passed down from mum flower and a copy passed down from dad flower. Now each chromosome can have a different version of that gene because there's multiple flower colors. I think on the previous slide, testing my memory here, I think there was red, yellow, purple, I can't remember, but there's so many different colors of flowers. The versions we've got here are, this copy is saying red flowers. This copy is saying yellow flowers. Okay. Now, if you have different versions of a gene that code for different versions of a characteristic, they're referred to as alleles. So this allele is for red petals, and this allele is for yellow petals. It's a bit of a strange word, but when you get used to it, it's not too bad. Okay, so different versions of a gene are referred to as alleles. Okay. If the alleles in a matching pair of chromosomes are the same, they're called homozygous alleles. Homo means same, which I usually get a giggle out of. So homozygous means the same copy. Okay. So here we've got homozygous alleles for petal color. Both of them are yellow. So the color of the offspring flower should be yellow. Here we also have homozygous alleles for this flower. We've got red and red. So the color of this flower should be red. So I had a bit of a malfunction there. So what I wanted to do was to show that homozygous allele for yellow petals will produce a yellow flower. It's probably more orange, but we'll say yellow. And for homozygous alleles for red petals, we have the red flower. So hopefully that's not too much of a surprise. What color are the flowers with these homozygous pairs of alleles have just been revealed? I kind of spoiled the surprise there. Okay, so if the pairs of alleles are heterozygous, if the alleles in a matching pair are different, they are called heterozygous alleles. So hetero means different. So here we've got a homologous pair of chromosomes. We've got one allele for red petals and one allele for yellow petals. Which characteristic is expressed if the alleles are different? Now, some alleles are dominant to other forms of a gene and will always be expressed. This is probably the simplest relationship, okay? So one of these colors is dominant over the other, and the dominant color is red. Generally, darker colors are more dominant, okay? So in this case, the red overpowered the yellow, and the red allele was expressed. So the dominant allele in the heterozygous pair is the allele for red petals, because that was able to overpower the yellow and the flower was red. The weaker allele is referred to as recessive, Weak doesn't sound very good. So it's a dominant and recessive relationship. Now, when we do problems in regards to this, we use letters to represent different alleles. You always represent a dominant allele with a capital letter. So for the red petals, that was dominant, so we're going to use a capital R, okay? A recessive allele is always the corresponding small letter, okay? So it's not Y for yellow, it's little r, okay? Because these have a relationship together, so you need the same letter. And in order to represent this one as being dominant, we use capital, as opposed to recessive, which is lowercase. When you have a pair of alleles together, it's referred to as the genotype. So big R, little r would be the genotype for those plants. What color are flowers with the genotype big R, little r? They would be red, as we saw before. The fact that the actual color of the flower is red is referred to as the phenotype. So the phenotype is the physical expression of the allele pair. So it's what you see. What you see is usually termed as what is expressed. The allele pair for each characteristic is called the genotype, and the phenotype is the physical expression. So here we've got three examples. We've got three different genotypes: big R, little r, and big R, little r. So remember, big R represents red, little r represents yellow. So what color are all three of these flowers going to be? Homozygous dominant is going to have the phenotype. No, it doesn't want to do it. There we go. Red. Little r, so homozygous recessive, the genotype, is going to be yellow. And heterozygous, in terms of the genotype, is going to have the phenotype of red, because red is dominant from yellow. So here we have some terms that I would like you to please get down in your definitions document. Allele is a different form of the same gene, and it's represented by letters of a different case, so big B, little b. The genotype is the genetic information carried by the individual, and that is represented by pairs of letters of alleles. The phenotype is the observable characteristics of an individual, so it's their appearance, and that's represented by its description, for example, blue eyes. Dominant is the stronger characteristic, which is expressed in a heterozygous condition, and that's represented from a capital letter. Recessive is the weaker characteristic, and it remains hidden in a heterozygous condition, and you represent recessive with a lowercase letter. Homozygous is having two identical alleles on homologous chromosomes, and that's represented by the same case, either little b, or big B, big B. Essentially just having the same case, upper or lower, each time. Heterozygous is having two different alleles on homologous chromosomes. So different cases in terms of letters. So an example is big B, little b. Please pause the video and get this information into your notes. Here's a representation of what we've gone through. We've got our homologous pairs of chromosomes. Here we've got homozygous dominant, big R, big R. Now this is representing, it doesn't say what it represents, it could be anything. Here we've got homozygous alleles again, but it's homozygous recessive because it's lowercase, so that's the weaker characteristic. Here we've got heterozygous for a gene, or for an allele, sorry, on homologous chromosomes. And here they're heterozygous, so we've got one big R and one big R. An example that we can use here is short hair on a rabbit is dominant over long hair. So this is a practice problem. What I'd like us to do is use the letters big H and little h to represent this. So what would the allele for short hair be? The answer for short hair would be big H, because short hair is dominant. So the allele for long hair would be little h. There are 3 different possible combinations of these alleles because a body cell needs to have 1 copy from mum and 1 copy from dad. What are the 3 different combinations? We've got big H, big H, little h, and little h, little h. Try and describe these using the correct terms. Now first of all, these are genotypes, all of these, and these are phenotypes. Big H, you see short hair. Big H, little h genotype, we'll see the phenotype of short hair as well. And little h, we'll see the genotype of long hair. This top one, homozygous dominant, because same and capital. This one is heterozygous, because you've got different uppercase and lowercase. Here we've got homozygous, because it's both little h, recessive, because they're the small ones. Okay? Homozygous because it's the same, recessive because they're small. Alright, another problem. The ability to roll or curl the tongue upwards in humans is genetically determined. You actually can't learn this. Either you can do it or you can't do it. It's pretty odd. The rolling of the tongue is determined by a dominant gene. Alright, I'm going to try and do this. I think that counts. So I can do it, okay? So I'm pretty special, let's be honest. So what I'd like us to do here is to assign letters of big R and little r to represent each of the alleles. So the alleles you have, so the versions of the gene we've got are rolling tongue and not rolling tongue. Now which one's dominant? Rolling of the tongue is determined by a dominant gene. So rolling of the tongue is dominant. So we're going to assign rolling of the tongue as big R and not rolling a tongue, or not the ability to not be able to roll the tongue. That doesn't quite make sense, but can't roll. That makes more sense. So can roll is big R, can't roll is little r. What possible genotypes would a tongue roller have? Now, if you're a tongue roller, you have to have at least 1 copy of the dominant allele. So, big R, and big R, little r. Little r is not one. So you've got 2 combinations there in order to have a tongue roller. You need to have the big R present. The genotype for the non-roller can only be 1 version, and that's a little r, little r. One last problem. We've got opossums here, and their hair color can be brown or silver. The brown hair is characteristic. The brown hair characteristic is dominant, and the silver hair is recessive. So we're going to use P, big P, little p, to assign alleles. So, brown hair is dominant, that will be big P. Silver hair is recessive, that will be little p. The genotype of a heterozygous possum would be big P, little p, because heterozygous means different alleles. The genotype of a possum that has silver hair would be little p, little p. So the next section can be found in your notes. The basis of modern genetics is the study of herited characteristics, and it's due to the experiments that were conducted by this guy here. He was Gregor Mendel, so he's an Austrian monk, and he studied inheritance on pea plants. So that's how he figured out that characteristics can be passed down from generation to generation and how it was done. So this diagram here is again in your notes, so if you could fill this out, that would be fantastic. We've got pure breeding white flowers and red flowers. Okay, now pure breeding means that if those flowers are bred with other flowers that are purebred, they're always going to give rise to the same color. So pure breeding white flowers, white and white bred together, always produce white flowers. Pure breeding red, if you breed with other pure breeding red, always produce red flowers. Okay. Now what happened here? This is the parent generation. What he did was mixed pollen from each of these flowers. So it's called cross-pollination. So he mixed the pure breeding white with the pure breeding red. When the next generation of plants flowered, which we call the F1 generation, only red flowered plants were produced. So all of them were red. So red plus white went to red. And we refer to those as hybrids, okay? We only had red flowers plants being produced. The next experiment involved crossbreeding the F1 generation. So basically, all of those flowers were pollinated with each other, okay? So they were self-crossed. So you mix those together. Now the next generation, which we call the F2 generation, we had some interesting statistics, or he had some interesting statistics. 3/4 of all plants produced were red, and 1/4 of all plants produced were white. All crosses produced the same result. Now his experiments were so exact in terms of the results that a lot of people couldn't believe it, and they accused him for what they called Mendelian the results, which basically meant he changed his results a little bit in order to make them seem perfect. Okay, they were pretty spot on. This always happened. This same percentage, 3/4 red, 1/4 white, or 75% red and 25% white. Why was this? Okay, now the reason was to do with genetics and to do with inheritance. Now red plants were dominant, and this showed through in both generations. Okay, the red was always there, and when there was a percentage of red and white, there was always more red. So from that we can tell that red was the dominant characteristic. So in terms of alleles, we would have big R for red, little r for white. Now the initial flowers were pure, so they only produced flowers with the same color. What genotype would the parent generation have? Homozygous or heterozygous? Have a think about it. The answer is homozygous, okay, because they've got the same alleles in the parent generation, either red or white, okay? Therefore, what are the genotype for the parent flowers? Now they're going to be big R for the parent red and little r for the parent white. So when we cross the parent generation, what would the genotype be for the F1 generation? The answer would be all heterozygous, because the red flowers would pass down one red allele, so one of those two big R's, and the white would pass down one white allele. Okay, and we're going to cover this in the next video, which is on Punnett squares. So you're going to get 100% hybrid, heterozygous, big R, little r. Okay. The next part will be looking at the F2 generation, which we'll cover on Punnett squares. So Mendel had same results for all different characteristics of plants. So he didn't just do color. He looked at color. He looked at different ways that the flowers came up. He looked at seed colors, he looked at seed shapes, he looked at types of pods, he looked at pod color, he looked at stem length. And all the time, he had the same results, 75%, 25% in the F2 generation. The two conclusions from Mendel's experiments. Number one, genes always work in pairs. One copy from mum, one copy from dad. And one gene is stronger than the other. So there's always a dominant and there's always a recessive. All of the dominant versions are found here. Guys, thanks very much for watching the video, and I'll see you in class.